Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit.
Welcome back, all you citizens of the world. It's Michael James and the Live from the Heartland show for the week of September 14th in the year 2024. And I've got two old friends coming on now, Doy Gorton and Jane Addams, and they were last on when we went via Zoom down to Southern Illinois, and they talked about politics down in Southern Illinois and abortion and things that were going on currently. Today, we're going to take a little step back in time because Dee and Jane have a new book out called White South, and it is a beautiful book of photographs from very specific time in history, 1969, 1970. Dee had been involved with not only SDS, but with Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And he grew up in Mississippi in the Delta. He went to the University of Mississippi. He was appalled by some of the racial stuff that was going on and went on to be one hell of a photographer, worked for Life magazine. Jane, on the other hand, I met her in the SDS office on West Madison when she was the national secretary of SDS. And I'm really glad to have both of you on today. So hello to you down there in Southern Illinois.
And don't forget, Mike, we're married. I actually was able to marry this woman. It took a lot of work.
But you didn't take your last name? What kind of deal is this? Women's liberation or what?
She's a feminist. I didn't take her last name either, but you'd be surprised who calls me by her last name. We go to city council meetings and they'll say, Mr. Adams, talking about me.
That's because she was on the city council in Carbondale, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
Well, how about one of you tell us about this book, how it came to be? It's a beautiful book of photographs of Mississippi. It includes some, two pictures of drag races that I really got into. And it turns out both Dee and I had 40 Fords and we're into hot rod cars. The book is something else. And it goes to Parchment Farm. It goes to cotton gins. It shows debutante balls, all that kind of stuff. And I assume that Jane did some of the writing.
Yeah.
Dee took the photographs. Tell us about this book.
Well, Jane, you want me to go first and say something?
Absolutely. It's your work that you have nurtured.
Just photos. Go for it, Dee.
Okay. Michael, you got my background right, but what happened inside of SDS and SNCC was that it was like a university, like it was a postgraduate university of learning about things. And there weren't many people in the United States who were involved in that. We're talking about meeting folks who were coming out from being gay and the whole question of gay liberation. Meeting women who were writing the original writings on women's liberation, that we called it back in those days. So we had knowledge of an emerging world, a world that was just at that point coming out in 1965 and 1966 when you and I were traveling together. Later on, SNCC, actually during that same period, SNCC said, listen, if you want to be involved with the community and organizing, go back to your own community, which is the white community for me, and take a look at your people. Don't try to organize us. We'll take care of that. We need your help. No problem. We're not mad, but go take a look. That became the fundamental reason that I went back. And I spent almost a year in the South on a book contract from E.P. Dutton, along with Jeff Sharrow, who was an old friend of mine, had been a vice president of SDS. To photograph the White South. It wasn't just Mississippi, though it was centered in the Delta where I grew up. I grew up in Greenville. But it was also went across to Alabama, to Georgia, up into the Carolinas and around into Louisiana. And it was it was not what you'd call a road trip. That's what Robert Frank's book was a road trip. It was closer to what Walker Evans did in his photography, which was more like a set pieces where you'd go someplace, you'd look at something within the South, or in this case, the FSA, and photograph it. So I did that, and the book was never published. The editor dropped dead. He died tragically at a very young age. And the photographs, the negatives, just stayed with me as I moved on around. I became a photographer. I went on to, a professional. I went on and became chief photographer of the Philadelphia Inquirer. And then I went on to the New York Times and became the White House photographer for the Times, and during the Carter and Reagan administrations. So my book, those photographs, go all the way back. They are authentic. There's nothing you can change about them. They're not digital images. They're good old-fashioned silver images. So that this is going to be important in our discussion as we talk about the authenticity of photographs and the what we call evidence inside of photography. Jane wrote the essay. She's a trained professor. You can speak for yourself, Jane.
Okay. Well, I found the collection really exciting. Dee and I have done a lot of research together since we got together in the late 1990s. And we've done a lot of research in the Delta. And photography, I always saw photography as documenting what's out there. I always loved photography. I'm not a photographer, though I take pictures, but I use them as data. I simply use them. So these photographs that give us in many ways, the way the Farm Security Administration photographs give us a window into a past that is no longer accessible to most people. Some of us who are our age have real recollections, but anybody who's like 15, 20 years younger than us, it's a foreign land. And to understand it, and the history has gotten really flattened. The history is there are all these knuckle-dragging white racists down in the South, and then there were the blacks who went and did liberation. And the complexity of the relationships between black and white and the codes that kept the relations relatively peaceful, except when they went to the boundaries. And the underlying kind of ethos that prevented a true bloodbath, which everybody expected, those things are visible if you're knowledgeable and if you're asking the right questions in these photographs. You can see the nature of the relationships. He went to those places that were where they really defined the boundaries of what was acceptable. The Parchment Prison, and he photographed both blacks and whites in Parchment. And then at Whitfield, which by the time he got there had been very quietly, which was the mental hospital. And that had been integrated very quietly by the time he got there.
Dee, let me ask you, how many photos are in the book?
I think it's around 110. The book changed from a kind of a Robert Frank type minimalist book of photographs, like 50 photographs, white pages, no captions, into this full-blown complex text and photograph thing as we worked on it for almost 4 years, I guess. The concept inside of it is to try to understand this period, which was the last days, literally the last days of legal white supremacy, where the laws were shifting and changing as I was shooting per week. So every photograph you see in here is also during that period. This is the last people, who lived under white supremacy. But when you see their relationships with Black people, the interchanging relationships in the photographs, and we can easily show you in these pictures how they work, the codes, what we call codes, you can see the kind of hidden effects of white supremacy, how that took place with Black people. An example would be, if we look at the drag races, there's a photograph particularly of a drag racer, and directly behind him is a whole line of Black young men. The two things you must notice about it is, one, the drag racers are just loosey-goosey, everybody's happy. Behind them are a group of Black men, every one of whom has got their hands in their pockets. every one of whom is dressed up neat as a pin. Everyone has got their mouths closed and they're just simply looking at the car. In other words, we're not dangerous. We're here in a mixed company, but don't worry about us. We're going to be okay, which is the sort of theory behind that. A lot of my Black friends have looked at these photographs and, oh my God, yes, that's exactly what I do. I watch myself in public. I do these. So you see the results of what that life was like with white supremacy, with people under that kind of a regime. And when I grew up, if you went to Hushpupcana or if you went to Alligator, Mississippi or Indianola, each one of those towns, as you know, Michael, had different codes for the Black people. In some towns, for instance, you could go and eat at the end of the lunch counter, but you had to be very far at the very end of the lunch counter. In some, you could only go in the back door. You couldn't go to the lunch counter if you were Black to get food. All of those things were different. For instance, when I grew up, if you went into a room and you were Black, like a lawyer's office, you could sit down. But if a white person came, you had to stand up and get out of the eye line, not just get out of the way, but out of the eye line of the white person who then was seated, and you had to remain standing. You couldn't sit down as well. Now you could squat, but you couldn't sit next to somebody, or you could stand in a circle, but you couldn't stand in line, one after the other. So all of these details like this were learned from birth, and they're still being passed down by people. When people talk about sort of hidden racism and so forth, what they're talking about are codes and ideas that were instilled during white supremacy that still come down to Black folks and to white folks too. Whenever you feel like you're in danger around Black people, they'll make sure you know you're not, because they put their hands in the pocket. We've got photographs of it over and over and over again. So that's one of the key things to learn inside of that there is, in fact, an extraordinary kind of a ballet, Jane, would you say, or some sort of a way of understanding the codes without anybody saying a word. It was like the fish in the sea. It was like the water you were in. That's it. If you didn't know how to do it, you weren't from around here and you were about to get busted. And that happened all together. Our civil rights people who went south, and you knew, Michael, you went down there. They used to
No, I didn't go. I never went south. I mean, I did go on a tour with the movement newspaper guys, and I remember meeting Fannie Lou Hamer in her backyard when she was doing the laundry over a kettle.
That's right.
I don't think she was glad to see us, but we were honored to make her acquaintance.
Yeah. That's my family was, and Rouville was where my family passed through. And my father was run out of Rouville because he refused to beat a Black person one night when the Ku Klux came by the house. That's why it was what happened. And we were rescued. My family was rescued by a Jewish retailer and merchant in Greenville, Mississippi, which is right on the river there, who gave my father a job. So our background goes into all of that. My mother told stories forever, and it's in the book, about huge lynchings that took place around Rouville and up near that, along the Yazoo Mississippi Railroad, which Rouville is on. Fannie Lou Hamer recruited me into the movement. I met her, and she'd been beaten up and so forth. We talked, and I decided I was going to be with SNCC. I put a note up on my door at Ole Miss because I'm stupid. And sure enough, the Ku Klux Klan came to the door looking for me. So that was another big wake-up call. You know, I was a son of privilege. I knew that. I escorted the debutantes. I was a member of Kappa. I was pledged to Kappa Alpha Order, which was a fraternity that Robert E. Lee was the spiritual head of. I knew all the moves, every one of them. And nobody could fool with me because I was part of that kind of privileged whites from the Delta. So even when I moved across the board there and became in opposition, you still didn't want to fool with me because I knew all this stuff, you know, the family, all those things. Unless you were extraordinarily privileged, you didn't screw with me. And
well, let me ask you about another photo, the one where they have the new technology at the cotton gin setup. And you have a good description of the people in that picture, too. And then after you do that, I want to tell people the name of the book and where they can read about it and how they could get it.
Jane, why don't you talk about that photograph? It's the one that really intrigues you, too.
Well, there's a photograph in the gin, and there's a man who is sort of in a uniform, dressed in a uniform, a white man, and he's giving instructions to the white man who will be operating the gym. All these new buttons and gadgets and things on the instrument panel. And then there's a young man there too, like a teenager, and he's standing there looking bored as he can be, rolling his eyes like, oh God, I gotta be here, not really paying attention. And then way in the background, there's a black man standing there bent over, his arms akimbo, looking out the window, soaking everything up and listening. He's learning how to do it as well, but he's invisible. I mean, the three white men, he's not there. But he wants, what it looks like and what Dee experienced at the time was he wants to know what's going on with this new technology. He wants to know how it operates. And so you can see the various ranks and statuses of people, the expert who is sort of the boss, and the worker, the white worker, and then the kid, and then this black man. So
what he was doing was being invisible. Don't mind me. I'm okay. You haven't got to worry about me learning anything. I'm just going to look out the window over here. And his body language, you can see it. You'll see it in the photograph. It's extraordinary. I'm looking over here, and I'm becoming invisible. And I think that people actually have a lot of photographs that I have of people that you can see on the edge and the periphery of photographs who are becoming invisible. I've got pictures in Memphis, Tennessee during riots. All these white folks are standing on the sidewalk, and they're looking out this way. And here comes some black people along. We're not really here. We're just kind of walking real slow and getting past them and getting out of the way. It's extraordinary. And everybody understood it. As long as the signals were there, you're not threatening. If the signals were there, somebody was going to either, tell you to get out of the room or do something to you. It was a way in which small ways that people were controlled always and everywhere inside that society. But that's a society that broke up. It doesn't exist anymore in any kind of a formal way, but it still exists all over the place. And you can see it in these photographs, which is one of the reasons why they're relevant. The other reason is because it was time when society was upside down, much like we have right now. And you can see how people were responding to that. I've got George Wallace rallies and people inside of the Wallace thing. I've got people demonstrating against integration. All of those things, you see people moving in certain kinds of ways, which are very analogous, Jane and I believe, because we've been through both for old folks, are analogous to a lot of the things that we're seeing today. And particularly during the presidential election and during the changes in Congress and politics. So how does something 60 years old become relevant, which is the problem we started with when we began working on the book? It's by going through and carefully putting together things that dealt with codes, ideas, aspirations, politics, all of that. So Jane wrote, I don't know how many essays, Jane, 6 essays, 5 or 6 essays, including sexuality, which is another thing that people refuse to talk about, which was absolutely front and center inside of our world of the 1960s. I know you wouldn't know about that, Michael, but a lot of other people do.
So let me ask you, first of all,
Jane, you wouldn't know about it either.
Let me just say the book is called Doy Gorton's White South. And so you go by Dee and Doy. I just call you Dee.
Yeah.
And there's a great review of the book in Mississippi Today by W. Ralph Eubanks. And if you go to Mississippi Today and just then do a search for Dee Gorton or just Gorton, you'll find the article because there are some nice pictures. And what I want to ask you, Dee, is is there a favorite photograph from the book that we haven't seen of the two we've shown so far?
I don't know. I guess.
And do you have is there something one event when you were taking a picture that stands out in your mind?
Well, I don't know about the favorite photograph. We've been over them so many times. The cover photograph is the most significant one. It shows women at a fashion show and a Black woman who's serving them. And that relationship, that's the thing that I think is important to see. As far as what I went through, no, I photographed George Wallace at his rallies. And he would always pick me out. I had credentials in it for Newsweek magazine, so I could get into the rally. And there he is over there, that pointy-headed intellectual. He's out there. He's taking photographs, folks. Don't smile for him. Tell him to get out, like that. And then I turn on the TV and I watch a Trump rally. And God, the same thing's going on. I'm thinking,
Yeah.
oh, this has happened 60 years apart. Exactly the same kind of thing. So we're old folks, and so we're going to share our age with you and learn the things that we saw in the 60s and things that we're seeing right now. It's all in that book.
Let me ask both of you, I know you're living in Southern Illinois, which is a long way from Chicago, and it's closer to Mississippi probably. What's your sense of Mississippi today? I know we have one, maybe two Black congressional districts there now. I still don't get how many liberal white people there are in Mississippi. I have a stepfather, late great commercial artist, Euclid Shook. He's from Belmont, Mississippi. So, I got a little tie to Mississippi, and I've been through the state a few times, and I certainly have admired not only you, but also a lot of SNCC workers that I've met over the years. What's your sense of Mississippi today? Is there any hope?
We've done a lot of research down there since around 2000, over the past 20 years. And one of the things that we found was that the most integrated, completely integrated church, I went to a number of churches, was a Pentecostal church.
Yeah.
And it was completely integrated. And there is a photograph in the book, a couple photographs of a revival that took place on Nelson Street, which was the Black business street in Greenville, of a white preacher who was Pentecostal, who had an integrated revival, tent revival. And the people there were ecstatic, and you could almost feel them breaking these boundaries of race, which in 1969 were still really held in place.
The minister brought a Black man up to the stage and washed his feet.
Yes.
Minister. I've got photographs of that in the book.
So the class issues are still really powerful.
Right.
Which we haven't really touched on. He has a lot of pictures in the book that look to that class nature. And a lot of the white upper classes have made their peace and found ways to make prosperity inside of the new racial regime. So, it reads differently. It's a different, a lot of the codes have fallen away, but a lot of them endure. Both class.
Let me take up on that part, because I think that's a good ending.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
A number of these photos are on the Fall Line Press website. If you just go to Fall Line Press, this book is featured, and a number of photographs are displayed there.
Well, Hal, you're going to have to look at those, grab some more. Go ahead, Dee.
Wait a minute. When you and I were doing early in SDS and in SNCC and so forth, we were concerned about class and race. And photography that was really treasured was documentary photography. As you know, documentary photography now is no longer something that people are interested in. It's all a kind of a certain kind of a museum quality, kind of a inspirational stuff. We're not into that. This is documentary in the old-fashioned way that looks at class and caste in a Southern town. So that's what we've got here. It's an old-fashioned way that we're trying to make brand new. So see if we're successful or not.
I, too, am influenced by, Walker Evans and a whole lot of other people, Dorothea Lange, Marion host
Right.
Walcott. And then someone that you don't mention, but you probably know, one of my favorite photographers is Danny Lyon.
Yeah, Danny started. I have started with Danny. I mean, he
Yeah.
was one of my very first influences.
Well, I'm coming down there to Southern Illinois in the not too distant future.
Hey,
Hang out with you guys to get some lessons on how to use my various cameras and talk books and photography. I'm looking forward to it. And I want to thank both of you for joining us this morning on Live from the Heartland for the week of September 14th. And you will get a copy of this interview and visuals, and you can send it to all the photographer friends and others that you'd like to.
Michael,
So-
thank you for inviting us on board. You're a dear old friend, and you're a good heart. You got a great heart.